I'd like to go ahead and call our subcommittee meeting to order today. I want to welcome all the subcommittee and welcome all that are viewing remotely. Before we begin, I have a few notes to announce about conducting our virtual meetings. The meetings must comply with the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. Accordingly, the public may view the meeting via a link in the advertised agenda. Unlike in-person meetings, where we're all visible, it's important to remember that members of the public may be viewing through the KBE Media portal and to be mindful of this throughout our discussion today. Please ensure your video is streaming and that you can be seen throughout the duration of the meeting. For any items that require a vote, a roll call vote will be necessary to record the vote of each member. At that time, the member should state his or her name, pause, and then state, "I vote yes" or "I vote no." Please silence or turn off all other electronic devices that may cause disruption to our sound feed. So at this time, Meredith will do the roll call. Meredith?
Dr. Randy Poe.
Present.
Dr. Lou Young.
Lou Young, present.
Holly Bloodworth.
Holly Bloodworth, present.
Dr. Amanda Ellis.
Amanda Ellis, present.
Dr. Nicola Mason.
Nicola Mason, present.
Mike Hesketh.
Mike Hesketh, present.
Penny Christian.
Penny Christian, present.
Superintendent Hamby.
Travis Hamby, present.
Chair, you do have a quorum. I believe that Audrey Gilbert, our student representative, plans to join us shortly, and Nora, our teacher representative, is teaching right now, so she was unable to log in this morning.
Okay, great. So we're going to have a discussion on the implementation of the Portrait of a Learner in Kentucky. Donnie Treem, a partner from the Center of Innovation and Education, is going to facilitate this discussion, which will include a review of what other states have done to implement their Portrait of a Learner, identifying promising options for implementation in Kentucky, preparing to gather feedback on these options using a journal map exercise, and making a plan for engaging stakeholders from across Kentucky. Donnie?
Hi, everybody. It's good to see you. Happy Monday. So many familiar faces, very exciting. And Penny, really, I know how engaged you have been in so many parts of this process, but just know that if today is not how you're feeling, able to really dig in, then just know that we can find an opportunity for you to lend your voice to this important work. And so just do what you need to do. Take care of yourself. And I know we'll do the same to support you. Well, as Dr. Poe noted, we're going to go through a process today of just digging into some examples that have come from other states and other communities. And then we will start to see if we can consolidate around some promising ideas. Where do people's sort of feelings and experiences take them? And then I will walk you through, with the help of our good colleague, Meredith Brewer, we'll walk you through demonstrating a process called journey mapping, where we'll try to anticipate what it would look like to implement any of these promising ideas. You'll have a little bit of homework between this session and the next. We're going to ask you to find somebody who represents an important stakeholder, and you're going to ask them what it would look like for them to walk through that idea. What would it look like for them to implement that idea? And we'll bring that data back on Thursday and help that, or use that to help us sharpen the ideas about and recommendations for implementation. And then we'll just close out, making sure that everybody's clear on next steps, and then we'll go from there. Are there any suggestions, questions, curiosities about any of that? Okay, seeing the standard eyebrow raise, yep, let's just gonna wait and see what happens, see what Donnie makes us do here. That's fine. Well, what I like to do at the beginning of any sort of or at a transition in projects like this, I hope you see in the chat that I've placed a link to a workspace that's a Google Doc. And what I always tell people is if Google Docs doesn't work for you in this moment, although I hope it should, then please feel free to use the chat liberally in order to have your voice be heard through that, and I'll do my best to transfer things over as that happens. But hopefully this can be a workspace for us to just share our ideas and to make sure that we are getting all of those thoughts out there. So you can see we're going to go through 4 of these 5 steps today. So the links that you see at the top, we're going to go through the first 4, and the 5th piece we will do on Thursday together. But the first piece that I'd like to invite us to do is actually just be honest about some of the biggest aspirations that we have with regards to this work, and also maybe some like hesitations or more cynical thoughts that exist and kind of chirp in the background. I find that it's really helpful to just name some of these things up front because it will help us be clear-eyed as we go into the rest of this work. And so I just invite you to choose a row on that part 1. We're just setting some vision for ourselves. Aspirational narrative might be like, if this were to go wildly, wildly well. Hey, Audrey. That looks like there's probably a plane on the other side of that window. Excellent. So if, some of you may have done a hopes and fears protocol in the past. This is similar to that. Although it's sort of naming like, well, are there things that we believe that could happen and things that we are scared of happening? Just choose a row, and Audrey has put the link back in the chat. Choose a row and just put out some thoughts about what are some aspirational hopes that you have for this, and what are some cynical kind of devil on your shoulder sort of thoughts that are coming to mind with regards to the Portrait of a Learner work. All right, I'd love to invite folks to just talk about, just share out things that they found really interesting. And if there are any questions or sort of dilemmas that pop up for them. Before I do that, I'm actually going to ask Meredith, because I'm just noticing this last note that's below the table. It says that talks about the inclusion of creativity. This is the way I conceptualized this process was more about the implementation of whatever the profile was, but I'm sure there are some next steps relative to the finalizing of the profile itself.
Thanks, Donnie. So during the August regular meeting, the curriculum committee voted to table approval on the portrait that you all prepared and sent to them for their review, so that we could garner feedback from the community and have a little bit more time with the proposed profile before approval. So the portrait is still sort of sitting in its previously approved state from this committee. We did get some feedback from board members about some skills and dispositions that they felt like maybe weren't captured in the current draft. So we can certainly discuss if there's any edits that you'd like to make. We would need to then reapprove it before it went to the committee in October. One thing that I do want to reiterate that we spoke about last time, I believe some of the topics that were discussed will be included in kind of those descriptive statements, as well as some of the recommended experiences that would sort of come out of the 5 skills and dispositions that have been identified. But in particular, creativity was something that was brought up. So I don't know if any of the board members that were on site in August want to share a bit about that conversation that the board had, and maybe if we want to kind of pause with the activity Donnie is leading us through and revisit, we certainly can do that.
My recollection, Meredith, included 2 additions that the board was asking about. Creativity and curiosity. Both of those, as I recall, came up, and I do think Wyoming has tried to address those as well. And I think someone made the point that a lot of times we lump together creative and critical thinking, and that maybe that's too much of a force fit, that if we're talking about creativity in terms of artistic expression, innovation, entrepreneurialism, I think Dr. Todd was kind of in that arena. I know Holly and I have had conversations on the curiosity and the art side of things. So those were the two that I recall.
Yeah, me too. And I think one thing to note is that I got a couple of suggestions sent to me, and it was kind of just adding creative to something else, like creatively solve problems, but that kind of thing. But that, I don't think that's what we're talking about. I think we're talking more in connection to that part of ourselves, as far as like a creative person, like in connection with the arts.
So I'm going to try to, the formatting is a little bit off here. I'm going to try to put into the chat the skills and dispositions and the descriptions that were approved previously, and we can look at those and see if you want to make a recommendation for an additional statement. I don't want to ignore or not give appropriate time to the feedback from the board. Chair Poe, what do you recommend that we do to sort of be sure that we're capturing? Would you like us to potentially revisit this and add a new skill and disposition? How, I don't, it's not wanting to populate here in the chat. There we go.
Okay, unfortunately, I wasn't at that particular meeting, so I don't have the full dialogue of that discussion. So I would I give the floor over to Lou and Holly to, since they were there, to what their recommendation would be. I mean, one of my concerns are as this thing grows, and what we did in Boone is we developed too many things. And I know in our strategic plan, or their strategic plan now, as they went back and tried to combine a lot of, from 11 to 6, because you get too many. And then people say, well, we're not creating that. So we have to make sure that we're not, just throwing everything into this document at the same time. So, but Lou or Holly, your thoughts?
Yeah.
And I guess, and Amanda, if you were there, I'm not sure if you were there at the meeting.
I am totally open to including it at this point. I understand your caution, and Wyoming touched on it in their report too, but we're still really early in the drafting phase. And I know Donnie's going to take us through an exercise where we get more feedback from empathy interviewing. So one of the things that Wyoming did, which we see happen a lot, is they clustered ideas together in such a way that they got a lot more bang for a buck of about 5 or 6 different skills and dispositions, which is always an option. And I do think I've heard enough. Holly was the first one to sound the alarm, but I've heard enough conversation around these ideas of, and I'm putting creativity and curiosity together kind of on purpose, because I think we could bundle those in a way that makes a lot of sense in terms of following lines of inquiry, prototyping, designing. There's a lot of richness in curiosity and creativity that I wouldn't want us to lose just because we were trying to be efficient. So if we're open to a motion, I would make the motion to include those in our draft language of the portrait as we move forward. I don't really see any big downside.
Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second, Nicola Mason.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and we have to do a roll call vote since it's a vote to include. So Meredith, you want to?
I'm sorry, Dr. Poe. Can I get clarification on exactly what that motion was for?
Lou, you want to say, since it's your motion?
And you may want to open it up to further discussion too, because I don't know how much time folks have had to get their minds around it. Penny, I think my motion would be to expand our draft portrait of a learner language to include creativity and curiosity as one of our learner profile skills.
So if I understand, this is Travis Hamby. Are we saying now we're going to add another whole competency? I mean, so we
Yes.
now are going to go from 5 to 6
In the draft.
and a question. I mean, I'm assuming. I guess I was. I'm hearing this came up in the state board meeting. I guess is where this conversation or the curriculum committee meeting.
It was in the full board meeting.
It was the full board. We actually did not have, we did our committees condensed, so all board members were able to provide feedback.
Yeah, and so are we thinking that this cannot be like we talked about at our last meeting? This is not maybe part of something that's already in existence on the profile. And then I guess another question is that I have is if we're going through input, I mean, are we not acting too quickly to make this change before we gather other stakeholder input, before we just like now add to it as a group now versus maybe after we've gathered input from others about this? I guess I would pose those two questions.
Well,
I think
I was going to say how I see it is we're addressing the state board issue that we did not have creativity and curiosity in the mix. And what we're doing is we're voting on to have that conversation. Now, what we add is, as Meredith was saying, is a draft. Now, what you're saying, Travis, I think after that is we have to take and explore all the options that you just talked about. And that's what I was talking about, clustering versus expanding, because when you get more than 5 and you start getting out, let's just say we go from 6 to 7, you start losing people when you get there. So I agree with you, but we are, to me, we're voting on the fact that we are going to draft something to include that into either the 5 or make it a 6, but that would be down the road.
And if I may respond, Chair Poe, I would just thank Travis for the question. And then the point that I would make is that it's a chicken and egg kind of question. We already know that some of the decision makers are saying, what about curiosity? What about creativity? And so if we want to poll that, perhaps is how we could think about it in our draft. We want to see how this puppy test drives, then it would behoove us to get it in the draft on the front end as we push it out to stakeholders through empathy interviews and whatever other communication and feedback strategies we build moving forward. Because we're hearing, the only response I've gotten back so far have been in those two areas. Nothing negative about anything else on the list. So,
and what I would take that, and I wasn't there, so help me out, Lou, or Holly, or whoever was at the particular meeting. I'm sensing this is coming from Dr. Todd in the relationship of entrepreneurship and those types of creativity and curiosity that he wants to drive Kentucky to be leaders in creation in the future and not just manufacturing and producing that's already there.
That was definitely a big chunk of the conversation, not solely Dr. Todd, but that was, yes, that was definitely part of the conversation.
I have one way to potentially get us to Thursday and potentially beyond that might thread the needle a bit. Sorry if I'm speaking out of turn as like an invited guest rather than a committee.
We're still in discussion.
You just say, Donnie, just, go play with your cats. But one thing that we could do is, I think what I hear you saying, Travis, is maybe we empower somebody to draft something for Thursday. But in order to get the feedback, one of the things that we're going to do as the homework between now and Thursday is actually talk to somebody about what they would do. We can add in, there's already a little preamble in there where we describe what are the current competencies, the 5 that are in there now. And we can ask, what do you feel about the inclusion of creativity and curiosity? And then what would be some of the key characteristics of those that you would want to see included So that'll give us like an interesting data set from everybody that goes to talk to somebody, which then might inform both the inclusion of curiosity and creativity, but also the description of the bullet that would really need to go with it in order for this to be complete.
And we have a little bit of a rules problem in that we have a motion and a second, but that's not out of keeping with what my motion was when I said to include it in the draft. So, Chair Poe, however you want to disentangle that, but that's my thinking. Is we're starting to hear already. We've heard it in the committee, and maybe for the sake of efficiency, decided not to add it to the anchor competencies that were already on the table from prior work. But
So Chair Poe, I think we could vote on Chair Young's motion,
Yes.
which would be just to, and then what we'll send out, Donnie has prepared sort of the journey mapping exercise. We'll make sure that we add in that bullet into the preamble that he said, so that when you go through the process of getting feedback, that will be noted with the additional cue to get feedback as to, should it be a sixth item? Should it be incorporated into the descriptions of the existing five? Something around that, so that by Thursday, we'll really have 2 action items,
Right.
Hopefully approval of the revised profile and then our portrait, and then also the implementation plan that we'll work to develop. So if you feel it's appropriate, we do have a motion and a second.
We have
we
a
can
motion and a second, but what and we were in the discussion phase. So any further discussion before we take the vote? Okay, so let's go ahead and take the roll call vote.
Randy Poe,
I vote yes.
Lou Young,
Lou Young, I vote yes.
Holly Bloodworth,
Holly Bloodworth, I vote yes.
Amanda Ellis,
Amanda Ellis, yes.
Nicola Mason,
Yes.
Audrey Gilbert,
Audrey Gilbert, yes.
Mike Hesketh,
Mike Hesketh, yes.
Penny Christian,
Penny Christian, yes.
Travis Hamby.
Travis Hamby, yes.
All members present have voted.
Okay, so the motion passes. So we will have someone draft that from KBE and include that, as Meredith said, for further discussion for Thursday's items. So Donnie, it's back to you.
Thanks, everyone. I love seeing democracy in action. So I would love just a little discussion around which opportunities for implementation are really like interesting to people, and what kind of questions are coming up for folks. So if we can have a few people just indicate which ones that seem really compelling, I think that'll help us get started or move the ball a little further. Or you can notice that there's already some interest that is building around a few of these.
I might put Mike on the spot a bit, just to ask you, Mike, if you would tell us a little bit about where you are in Shelby County. I know you guys are taking Portrait of a Learner deeply into the community. I was there at the launch this summer. I was thrilled to see so many people. But when I read every one of the bullets from Wyoming around community, your work in Shelby County came to mind. So it might be helpful for the team to hear that as well, if you would please.
I'd be glad to. So in Shelby County, we took the initiative that we're going to go very broadly. We embraced the idea of the school being the hub in our community, and that we would, our prototype is to roll out our Portrait of a Graduate to the entire community. We broke the community, key players in the community out, and we assigned individuals and teams to develop a plan to reach out into the community and to initiate conversation with the community about what we're trying to achieve with our portrait of a graduate and how it will affect assessment and accountability, try to address the concerns that they have around there being rubrics in place, that it is objective, and then really to get them to embrace that they too will make the portrait, the elements of the portrait, the way they do, not do business, but the way they or incorporate them into the interviewing process, the assessment of employees. There was an idea shared that we would invite students to come on site at our businesses and ask to interview a critical thinker, as an example, or a collaborator, and the company would present someone who would sit down with the student and articulate how they are an effective collaborator in their work every day. So we saw that as a way to make sure that our community was embracing and internalizing the portrait.
And there were, I really loved the idea. There were folks from agriculture and healthcare and banking and retail and food service and hospitality, and all the sectors were represented at that launch. And I heard several small group discussions. Yeah, we can revise our screening application to include questions devoted to each of the elements of the profile. And that even hiring part-time students in that process. So making it relevant at home was a really powerful takeaway for me that day.
Yes, and helping our community to understand what we mean by deeper learning. I'm getting much better clarity now. We've struggled a little bit with the rollout of the message because it's hard to tell exactly what do we mean by deeper learning. And I've been getting some great stuff that people have been writing that have helped to clarify what we mean when we say deeper learning and what our real goal is and how it will translate into students and ultimately graduates who are more broadly prepared for success in life, however they define success in life. That's part of what we're trying to embrace these days, is that the idea of workforce. As employers, we thought that was the end goal, that individuals would graduate and become part of the workforce. But there's more and more of a sentiment that, yes, people they aspire to do something with the rest of their lives, but it's not to be a worker per se, and that our broad range of participants, industries, and as Lou shared, that there is a full range of opportunity, but that students want to, they'll define success in their lives a little broader than we have historically, and we need to embrace it.
And so just one last comment, Donnie, Chair Poe, if that's okay. As I look at the Wyoming stuff, I can see the inferences here, but really a powerful takeaway for me is that everybody needs a mic, right? Every community needs that kind of bold partnership, not an educator, but a true partner in that work who will bridge the education community divide that he talked about. It's a knowledge divide more than anything. It's certainly not a spiritual one or not getting the right word, but it's a divide about what we don't know about each other's experiences. So if I think about one of the things that will behoove us moving forward is when you have a Penny Christian or a Mike Hespeth or other folks who really get this in your community and they begin advocating alongside you, then that's an unstoppable force, I think.
I think it's a really well taken point, Lou, and I think Mike and Penny you both have been very vocal about the fact that you have been engaged with this process since the beginning. You helped to build your prototype. In your case, Mike, Penny, you drafted in larger part, some of the vision elements that drove the things that were created in communities. And so you, through the process of making that, you built the knowledge that is fundamental to being mobilized to support it. And I think that for me feels like the tie between 1 and 2 in the list here.
Yeah.
that you have to be engaged, and then you have to do this ongoing work to really integrate the portrait learning to the local context. Any other reflections on that?
I would share one other piece, and that is, as educators, I am in awe of you all. It's been a pleasure being part of this. One of my personal fears is parents, that helping parents to understand how this will work for their students. Change is hard, and parents, our teachers are amazing that they're changing the way they teach, and they can be so broad. There's the deeper learning thing where it says in the classroom it'll look like this. That's fantastic, because the classrooms are going to be different. Getting parents to embrace that, I think you all have your hands full. And I think when we say community, we do mean parents as well, but I'm as equally concerned that these changes are something that parents will struggle also to understand and embrace as the best thing for their child in the broader sense.
Can I comment on that as that parent? And I am the parent of a senior, but that fear comes from the fact that there's always been a lack of access, right? We know that. So don't be afraid that we're afraid of change and we won't accept it. Be afraid when we have districts that don't give those opportunities a chance to happen. So it's not going to fall at the feet of the parents. It's the fact that the access has not been there, and they've determined who deserves to go into workforce. They've determined who deserves to be in gifted and talented classes. That's not the concern. We're good. Come to us with the information, and I guarantee you we'll give you what you need.
Although I think one thread that I'm hearing is that one way we've conceptualized this in my home state of Georgia. For those of you who don't know, I live in Georgia, and we do some deeper learning work here. And the way that we conceptualize the root causes for why there's not more deeper learning is that there's practice issues. People don't fundamentally know what to do in the classroom. There are public will issues, which are habits, traditions, and mindsets about what school is supposed to look like that hold people back from. And that's sometimes a family issue, sometimes it's a teacher issue, a principal issue. And then the actual policy.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all, Donnie. My experience has been that as we were moving towards deeper learning and creating a whole new transformational learning process, the issue comes back in when you get into policy and practice. When we were changing the policy of our grading to match deeper learning in competency-based education, that is where we struggled the most, because people didn't understand the fact that I could get X number of 4s or A's or however you want to look at it leading up to, but my final capstone project wasn't sufficient enough. And then all of a sudden you're saying that the student is average and getting a 2 on the overall thing didn't lead to it, and have to go back and do the work. That's where our particular problem came in. They didn't have problems with deeper learning, but they had problems with policy of grading, because that was so hard. And we have a whole UK professor, Dr. Gusky, who has worked for years on that, and we brought him in and the different things, but that was still hard to comprehend. So you're right. Everybody is in favor of deeper learning, but then when you get into policies, that's where problems start coming in the face. Those were some very wicked meetings, I can say.
But I think that speaks to the importance of number 1 and 2, because they are about getting people in on the front end, as opposed to trying to convince them that you're doing the right thing on the back end, which I think we've all probably got some scars to show from that. Remind me to tell you about the time we tried to change start times for all the high schools across.
Yeah, that was part of our process too. It was lovely.
Any other thoughts on the list here in terms of what people are resonating with and or maybe having questions about. Thinking about our higher ed partners here, if you have anything that's sticking out to you.
Well, I'm not coming directly from an institution. Obviously, Nicola is, and so I will definitely defer to her. But I do think overall, just the buy-in from teachers and understanding what that transition looks like. And it's not that they don't buy into where they see that this is authentic and helpful. I think it is welcomed. But the logistics around preparing folks and preparing incoming teachers and those who, it's change is always intimidating and tough. And so if you go with it, you have to go with it with appropriate supports and some empathy on how people are on that range of change. We've always read about change research around where people are, those who are the go-getters and those who are more resistant. And so I think you have your own internal culture and community to talk with, and that's part of how you build things out, your school leaders, district leaders. So I think that it's a complex thing. And so it's worth the time, but I think it's we can't make just quick assumptions that it's embraced by all immediately. I think we have to be intentional and strategic and have a process for onboarding and really being supportive of those changes and taking on those hard questions and conversations. And then I do think about teacher preparation and what that looks like as you prepare teachers to walk into a classroom that is non-traditional and what they probably did not grow up in. That's going to look different. The expectations are going to feel a little different. The task, the preparation, I think, not that any of those things are bad, but it is different. And I think we just have to be considerate of that too. And just the internal community of how you build capacity within for all different roles. That's just my 2 cents on it. But.
I support your 2 cents, Amanda. Thank you for jumping in. Yeah, I think the EPPs have they're integral stakeholders to align the portrait of a learner with the CPE's graduate profile. The timing of this is really good. With our 10 essential employability skills, I can see a very clear crosswalk, clear connections. I think it's opportunities for for expanding, grow your own, especially as it comes to teacher pathways through dual credit. I can see very, very strong connections between what our institutions of a higher ed are really talking a lot more intentionally about implementing and what we're doing with the portrait of a learner. So they're good opportunities. These conversations are happening everywhere now.
One thing that's occurring to me as I'm looking through your comments and the things that people seem to be connecting to is that I could imagine 1 and 2 being sort of foundational. So it's community engagement and then defining what it looks like locally. And then as local communities explore how they want to deepen it, then the other pieces, the things like 3 through 9 actually become options that local communities could take on. And then one of the things that Meredith pulled out that she was really interested in was this idea of networked learning. I don't know, Meredith, you were really particularly interested in it, or if you were just saying like let's put this into the piece here. But that networked learning could then be how communities learn from each other about their specific whatever they're doing to pilot and implement locally. So it could be like kind of a whole back end, like a front end, everybody engages their community, try some stuff, and then you network and learn from each other about what you're discovering. I think that aligning teacher prep systems to the broader portrait of a learner feels like an additional pipeline element that empowers the whole thing, the implementation locally. You may be able to tell that I was an engineer by training, and so I'm thinking about everything as like a conveyor belt and blocks that go together. Yeah, sorry about that. Any other pieces, novel ideas or examples from other states that people find compelling? Any reactions to that?
So I'm really energized by those last couple of points on the list. The real meat for me is how we begin to change policy and practice so that the portrait of a learner is deeply relevant and implemented across Kentucky. So the unleashing of the beast, I think, really excites me. I see unlimited potential for progress moving in this direction.
Just to specify, Lou, are you thinking about the teacher profile and the?
No, let me go back to the one about a pilot for local innovation regarding high school standards, taking the idea of local innovation one step further, using graduation standards and profile of a graduate to make a set of decisions about which of the existing high school academic content standards should be compulsory. And then the one before that, that gets at competency. Yeah, 5.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that it leverages more powerful, lasting change.
Yeah, there's something about if you can get the flywheel spinning, it becomes a self-perpetuating thing too. And I'm wondering if, Travis, you're starting to see this and Alan with the profile. Like once you start increasing the visibility, then you start changing practice, then you start having more proof points, then people have more things to point to, which then makes their practice shift more. And if you get enough momentum, then you can start changing both the way people feel about new models for instruction and start creating momentum for some of the policy shifts.
I would just note on number 8, the developing teacher profiles, which I think is really important. I guess makes me think it's not just teachers though, it's leaders as well. What does it look like to lead in this space, facilitate change, just like Amanda was talking about a moment ago, right? I think we are so used to thinking about change and tinkering with the system and making technical shifts, and everything we're talking about really is more mindsets and cultural shifts that have to occur, and that is not slow to happen. And to your point, what I see early is a lot of technical things, right? That's what begins to happen on the front end, because those are pretty easy to maneuver. Yeah, so it's how do you begin to intentionally teach these things? How do you begin to intentionally incorporate them into the learning experiences so that students are building the muscle of collaboration, that citizenship muscle that we want them to build? And that takes a different approach from the teaching standpoint. It also takes a different approach from the leadership standpoint.
Yes, Travis, I'm so glad you said that, because I think that's something that we in the past, and I can say it from personal mistakes, is that we often assume that the school leaders know exactly what to do and what their role is. And so we all know, especially if we've been there, is that if we have a group of innovative teachers who want to do something, but the leader isn't supportive or doesn't understand the role, it doesn't go very far. Or if the leader comes and says, you shall do this, and we're going to totally rearrange and we're doing this, that doesn't go well either. It is not good on culture. But I think really being explicit with what those roles look like. And that's where I think really even having the grace to fail a little bit and acknowledge like our preconceived beliefs and notions of what we've always known, and to have to process through that. It is slow to go fast, but I think setting like milestones of like accomplishments for the big goal, because I think if we have this vision and we don't have short-term, milestones that we're reaching, because it's not going to be overnight. It's just not going to happen. But if we really want sustained change, we've got to really respect the process, right? And think about the multiple roles and how they all work together and where they fit into this. And I think sometimes when we've done some really great things, we've never gone through the full process because it's taken way longer than any of us want to take. And I say me, I'll say me, I don't even say we. I have little patience for long process, but if you really do want sustained change, especially in a school environment or district, it just takes getting folks on board to see what it looks like, what it feels like, and what their role is to support it or to implement it. And I think, and to acknowledge change. And, we've done this so many times in education. This can't be one more thing that we just change, but it's got to be real belief system, change in behavior, change in priority, change in what we look for. And that's just a little bit of time. But I hope that what we learn from and what we move forward with collectively is really respecting those role groups that have influence on that change of sustainability, and help roll that out into how you do grow and build that capacity and think differently. I think that's going to take some time, but worthy of the time, in my opinion. So I appreciate what you said, Travis. Thank you.
Yeah, and Amanda, I agree with everything you said, but in addition to, I guess, is one of my things that I look at, like this committee also, that it's our assessment too. We have to look at how we're willing to change our assessment. And I still see, lack of KDE, of the Division of Assessment, not being part of this particular process of how do we drive this change. Because the feedback that I will get from the superintendents and the others is, until we change the assessment, this learner profile is great, but as Travis can tell you and Michael can tell you, they have to assess their portraits in a different way than the state testing mechanism. So I would hope that as we continue down this pike, and I guess, Donnie, I don't know if this falls in your realm or KDE's realm or whoever's division, there is that we have to get the Division of Assessment involved in this process if we're truly going to make this thing work at the end of the process. Because the biggest fight that I ever had in implementing any of this is, well, the assessment. And I had to sit there in a meeting and say, we don't care about the Kentucky assessment. We're caring about kids and making sure that we're going to do it, and the assessment will take care of itself. But there's not a lot of superintendents out there that have that years of experience that can make that statement, because they know that they have that particular protection. We have so many young superintendents, and this goes back to Travis's statement before about leadership, that are in their first contracts, and they're not willing, nor could they make those statements. So we, and I know Commissioner Glass is doing that in his deeper learning process, but we've got to get to that stage 3. So I would hope that in this process that we have to address assessment when we're addressing policy changes. And if we don't, we're going to get the same old, same old.
I really appreciate you saying that. And I saw a lot of nods, because we've been talking about this for a long time, and you all more than me, obviously. I'm applying for dual citizenship in Kentucky, but it's not gone through yet. But it's interesting, because actually just last week we were, as we're preparing for the launch of the Kentucky United We Learn Council, we were actually starting off with a provocation about different ways of thinking about accountability. And we previewed it with the folks in the assessment and accountability department, because we wanted to make sure that we're all moving together here, and we're all feeling like this is an area we can explore. and that we want to encourage some out-of-the-box thinking around. And so everybody feels good about it. And so one of the first activities that we'll do at that launch is here are 3 different ways of thinking about accountability outside of what we've traditionally done. And I think this process should also explicitly push forward on that. We should say that this is something that we want to do. Or that's what I'm hearing, at least. I mean, this is not my drum to beat alone. All right, well, let's move into the next piece. And we are going to, throughout this process, starting from the KCAE all the way to now, we have been endeavoring to make sure that we are learning from stakeholders and gathering the insights from their experience. And yes, empathy interviews are my favorite thing, but this is actually a different process we're going to undertake. This is a process that we call journey mapping, and it's not looking backwards at a story that of an experience that they've had. It's actually looking forward and asking them to help us anticipate issues. Here's the problem with anything that was if you went to somebody and said, hey, do you think any of ideas 1 through 9 is this a good idea? They're going to say, yes, it's a good idea. And so the amount of feedback that you can get from that is actually fairly limited because thank you, yes, thumbs up. What we actually want is to use their skill and experience and insight to help us predict problems. And the journey mapping exercise can help us do that. It can be retrospective, but can also be anticipating issues. And so what you can see here for growth-oriented Georgia, this was actually created by the Office of Teaching and Learning at KBE. This was taking one of the user profiles from the United We Learn report and saying, well, what is Georgia's journey through the existing professional learning system? She admits and recognizes problems in a meeting where the data is shared from the test results. She grapples with the problems by herself. She identifies a personal need, and then she seeks out resources. She tries and sees what sticks, and then she rinses and repeats. So that's like her journey through the existing system. So this is a little bit retrospective, but you can imagine how we're going to use it to help us anticipate something. And the also important thing that it does is it actually gathers in their emotional state at each step. So you can see these little faces, these little emoji-like faces of frazzled hair, angry teeth, questions and light bulbs, and sad faces. So this is just trying to capture, where do things go wrong? Where is the system not doing something to support her? And so it's a good way of sort of saying, all right, well, walk me through it. What's a day in the life of your experience? Let me walk a mile in your shoes. And so we are going to engage in a similar approach. You're going to take one of the ideas from the above list, and you're going to present it to a stakeholder. Mike, you might choose another colleague who's in the industry, or you could say, well, hey, I'm going to get a city councilor and I'm going to see if we can talk through this. Audrey, you grab a student. Like what would it be like to actually go through different high school graduation requirements? What would that experience look like? Higher ed partners, what would it look like to actually go through a different kind of teacher prep system? And you're not only going to get them to walk you through the steps, you're also going to ask them, well, what steps would be easy within the current system? And what steps do you think would be hard? Because that's actually where the insights are going to come from. Because where they tell you that this is going to be impossible, do you know how much paperwork that would require? Like, that's going to tell us something very important about the system. So there's a link here where you can get your own copy. It'll prompt you to download your own copy, and you can feel free to follow along. But I'm actually going to walk through this experience as if I were really doing this with Meredith Brewer. Hi, Meredith.
Oh.
And there's actually a script that I have in here that is written to encapsulate this project. And so if you want to follow along in there, I'm going to be taking notes as if Meredith was a teacher that I was talking to about participating in networked learning. Okay. All right. Meredith, are you ready to become a teacher?
Always. That's
Yes.
my perpetual state.
Great. And so I'm going to be talking as if Meredith was a teacher that I had cornered in order to get her feedback about this idea of network learning. And I would start off with something like the Kentucky Board of Education. Hi, Meredith. Thanks for meeting with me. Thanks. The Kentucky Board of Education has been working to define a portrait of a learner. It's a list of abilities and skills a young person should develop as they move through school. And we've been working with community members, students, educators, and families to define this list. And here they are, and you would rattle them off. And as we just discussed, I actually inserted a question in here that says, what do you think about including curiosity and creativity to this list? What elements of curiosity and creativity would you want to see included in this portrait? So that's like question one. So I would just get her thoughts on that in order to fuel our next discussion. Well, thanks for that input, Meredith. The input that you just gave. Thank you, Meredith.
Brilliant. That you are so impressed with my response. Got it.
I have such a clear idea of curiosity and creativity now. Like it's boggles the mind. Well, we're now in the process of thinking about implementation. What will it look like to make the portrait of a learner real in our communities? And so we're talking with students, families, and educators from across the community to get their thoughts on some of these ideas. And I wanted to share an idea with you and have you walk me through what steps you would take to make this happen. And if you have to take a guess about what somebody else would do, then feel free to just say that, like, oh, I would guess that my principal would do something, like my principal would make me do this or something. And so just walk me through your experience. Your personal information is going to be kept confidential, except that you're currently being recorded and broadcast to the entire Commonwealth. So yeah, there's that. But so do you have any questions about what we're going to do now?
Do not. I'm ready.
Okay. All right. Well, the idea that I want to share with you is this idea of networked learning, where we bring people together with the portrait of a learner from all different communities into a shared learning space because they have a shared priority or a question or a particular problem of practice. And we would bring this group together and we would support you to experiment with things in your classroom. And then we'd bring you back together to learn from each other about what you've been doing and how it's been going. So if you were to walk me through, like, put yourself in the shoes of somebody who just got a note in their box that said, you're going to go participate in networked learning. Like, what's that journey like for you? What are some of the key steps that you would take?
Well, at the school where I teach, we get a lot of those notes. So we love to have professional learning communities, book studies, all kinds of times to gather together and talk. Sadly, though, those aren't always terribly productive. So I guess my initial reaction is, if you're going to strongly advise that teachers participate in this, they would need to be reassured that it will be valuable. And so we'll want to be sure that there's a sense of commitment and understanding about what is going to happen, because otherwise sometimes my fellow teachers may be a little apprehensive about another group that we need to participate in.
Okay. And so let's just say that somebody gives you that reassurance, then what does it look like for you? What comes next?
So I'm aware of the Portrait of a Learner group. We get updates on some of the United We Learn work from time to time from our administrator. So we know that this is something the department is working on. And I am aware that the board has talked about the skills and dispositions, but I guess as an elementary school teacher, I don't fully understand what might shift in my classroom instruction to sort of work toward these skills and dispositions specifically, different than what I'm already doing. I really try to have opportunities in my classroom for students to have project-based learning and other opportunities like that. So is this something that would require a big shift? So that's something that I think is a little unclear to me. So I would probably need to spend a little bit more time with the skills and dispositions, and I appreciate that the document was provided, and I can look at what you've identified. And you know, based on my brilliant response about curiosity and creativity, I assume that that would be something that was incorporated, because as a second grade teacher, I can tell you that that is something that is very valued within our students, and we want to be sure they have opportunities to express that side of their academic experience. So I think before we even got in a group, I would spend some time reading, thinking about what I already do in my classroom, just to make sure I could contribute to the conversation, and probably ask a lot of questions, because I want to understand what's going to change for me as a teacher.
Who would you ask those questions of?
So we do have access in our district to a curriculum coach who I know is participating in some of the KBE funded experiences. So they are participating in project-based learning opportunities, and I know that they're aware of the work with Deeper Learning Dozen. So I probably would go to them. And we actually aren't an L3 district, but one of our neighboring districts is. So I would maybe follow up with some of my colleagues there to understand what they're doing with L3. There's a lot going on with this, I know, but it's hard as a classroom teacher to really make sense of all the different elements of it. So I probably would ask my network of teachers in the neighboring district.
So if this were following the pattern of some of the other like groups that you've got to be in, these PLCs, these book studies, like what happens next? Now you go to the meeting. What does that look like, do you think?
So if I'm being perfectly honest, there's probably going to be a little bit of which I should be.
You should be. Okay, you got to encourage them to be honest. Otherwise,
I am. And since this is going to be kept confidential, other than the fact that it is live streamed right now, I think there's going to be a little bit of, if it's a group of teachers, and you know, I would maybe even recommend, if you're able to take this back to your team, there might be great value in not having it just be teachers. It might be great if we could have this learning opportunity, since we're all sort of in the exploration phase, be beyond just classroom teachers. So if we could have community members and parents, we have a really active community, and our families really want to be involved in what's happening. So it would be great if it wasn't just instructional leaders, if we could also have community members present in that time. But I think there probably would be a little bit of conversation in that first meeting, and maybe set of meetings, just to sort of level set and figure out, is this happening? What are we doing? How much time do we want to invest in this? Sort of, you know, we're trying to figure out if this is a fad, or is this something that's really a shift that's going to take root? So I think probably there's going to be a little bit of those sorts of conversations. And so, just as I said before, you know, I think there's some skepticism about some sort of initiatives. So I think probably a little bit of that, but then as a teacher, I'm going to really, as I said, think about, how will this change what I do tomorrow in my class? What do I need to think about changing kind of in the immediate future? And then long term, what do I need to be thinking about how I'm going to change how I work with my students? And what do I need to do to make sure that I'm preparing them, because ultimately they're going to be leaving and going to the next grade. And is this going to change sort of what we need to be thinking about as far as them being ready to advance?
And so just taking a meta pause here.
Like, meta pause. Okay, now I'm myself again. Okay, I'm ready.
You're still a teacher at heart, but now you are Meredith Brewer of the Office of Education. And then this is really to the whole group. Like we're just walking through what she's anticipating. This is also, you can see where we're kind of going like, well, in an ideal world, and it's like, more likely, less ideal world. And we're kind of pivoting back and forth between that. That's natural and that's actually very useful because we can kind of see, well, what would we need to do to make more of the ideal situation? And where is it likely to go off the rails, which is what this process is about. You can imagine that Meredith and I would go through a few more of these steps. It will make sense to you probably where like to kind of pause and stop, but it's good to ask a question like, say this goes really, really well, like what does the end of this process look like for you? And then where could it go really wrong? And then this is where you ask, what's likely to be easy, like the easy parts of this process, and what is the most likely parts to be difficult? And so that then gives you a lot to you can go back to the specific steps and say, like, which parts do you think you're going to the whole system is going to trip up on the most? And, in an honest conversation, you're going to get a lot of things like, well, my principal is just not very good at facilitating blank. Or like, sometimes these colleagues are just going to be grading papers in the background and that's going to be tough. Or we're going to have a really great time because of blank. And so these are all useful insights to try to gather in. So Meredith, anything that you want to share about like that? This is still meta Meredith.
I'm confusing myself. I'm having personality crisis. Okay, who am I now? Am I?
This is you. This is Office of the Commissioner.
Oh, got it. Okay, I'm ready.
So tell us a little bit about like what that process was like for you, just going through and sort of having the questions come at you like that.
So I think that this is starting down the road that we have all felt like is so important in this process, because those who have been involved to this point, I think, have a different level of commitment in its success. And so now we're trying to move to kind of the scaling up phase where we're saying, what does this look like statewide? And so I think this is where we're going to potentially have some questions, some individuals we may encounter who are less aware, maybe not at all combative, maybe they would ultimately be supportive, but they just don't have the same familiarity with the work. And so I think that's really important to get their perspective. And certainly what I shared about teachers' experiences with sort of these smaller learning groups, we've heard frequently, right? That everyone knows there's value in a professional learning community, but forming it is insufficient, right? You can't just gather everyone together and then hope that the learning commences. There needs to be thoughtful planning. So I think that it was helpful to sort of put on that perspective and sort of think through some of those things. So I do think there's a lot of value in getting this feedback, and even more so if the individuals of the subcommittee could find people who maybe they know have been a bit removed from this work, all the better, so that we can be thinking about those perspectives we may have missed.
And one thing I want to note is that this is actually related directly to Travis and Amanda's point from before, that often the insights that you're going to gather from a teacher actually tells you more about the kind of leadership practices that we're going to need to account for. Like, well, how do we scale quality facilitation? How do we scale knowledge among the leadership cadre that has to then support all of these shifts in behavior? And similarly, I think when you go and interview a fellow superintendent, Travis, they're going to give you a lot of insights about what kind of political cover they're going to need in order to reach for some of these aspirations. And so we're going to, by talking to individuals, we're learning about their experience, but also the environment around them. And so that's where a lot of this value is going to come from. Any other observations of questioning techniques that I used, redirection techniques that I used, ways in which Meredith responded that you want to lift up for the group? Because just reminder, this is your homework. So this is a good time to get prepared. or what do you have questions about? Because there's a lot of sort of pivots that can be made as the conversation happens.
Donnie, are we conducting one of these set interviews, and we are choosing the stakeholder that we would like to interview?
That's correct. You can do more than one if you're so moved. You might find it valuable to do more than one, but we're hoping that everybody does at least one so that we can sort of triangulate across.
My question might be to Holly and Penny, because we both put our names next to develop teacher profiles. Have you considered who you might be interviewing already? I definitely feel like there needs to be a component of diversity for different perspectives. Weighing in some interest there, what you're thinking.
I thought I might interview my new department chair. She comes from a public school background. She was a principal, but now she is at the college level. And so I thought she would be a nice person. It would almost give me two perspectives of what that might look like in the elementary education department itself, but also from a school administrator perspective.
Thank you, Holly.
Mm-hmm. I also teach a 180 class, and I thought I might, that's an introduction to education. So the students are right out of high school. So I thought I might interview one of them also.
I think I'm going to shoot for someone at the district level, possibly in curriculum, and if not, maybe in teacher support.
We have our model lab school on campus, and so they are always our first go-to. They're excellent partners. So I was going to start there, but I also have an elementary and a high school principal. This idea. But thank you for sharing your ideas.
And Audrey, I didn't. Sorry, you probably indisposed. But in terms of thinking about students that you may want to talk to, or anybody, don't limit yourself. But I could see any of these, like a number of these different pieces, really being important to gather student impact or student input around. And so feel free to do one student, or where you go through multiple pieces around engagement or their experience going through, or do multiple students.
Can I ask a question to the group? I guess I'm wondering, this kind of goes back, I think, to Randy's comments earlier about the assessment and accountability piece. I'm wondering, does anyone have access that could potentially talk with a legislator from their perspective? I would, or I'm going to be out of pocket for the next couple of days, so I would not have easy access to someone, but I think it would be really great to gain have their perspective and stakeholder input here.
I can definitely do that.
That's great. And thank you, Travis, for raising that. And actually, well, let me invite folks to dig into part 4, which is exactly what we're doing now. So we're right in the pipeline around each committee member choosing a stakeholder to engage with, and which idea you're going to present to them. And it couldn't, like I noted with Audrey, that can be a hybrid, right? So combination of things, like walking through different elements of it. And what we'll do, Nicola, is also go through and just make sure that we have the right split of perspectives. And if we need to shift and ask if people could interview somebody else, then we may try to do that. But we're starting to feel like we're getting a good mix here. So purely logistics. The link above, which we'll share in a follow-up email, will prompt you to download a separate copy each time you click it. Or you can make a copy within Google Docs, download it to a Word file, do whatever suits you. And then in terms of completing them and getting them back to me, just share them with me. And my email address will be included it's both included on the invite for today, but it's also inside the document. And I'll send the follow-up email with the link so that everybody has my contact info. You can see on Thursday, we'll try to take everything that we've learned about the different implementation ideas, and we'll synthesize them together and start to indicate, well, where do we want to place our recommendation energy? Not that anybody would be not permitted to do any of the above, but where do we want to really lean in and say, these are what we think are the highest leverage things to do. One of the things that we were just talking about, which I want to just highlight and see if this sounds okay to folks, is this. What really struck me as I was listening to all of you share the different implementation ideas is that there is this sort of progression that we may want to say, like, everybody should do stakeholder and community engagement around this stuff. You should build capacity and integrate it locally. You can experiment with different ways of doing it and then do networked learning to share across communities, while also ensuring that the principal, or the teacher and leader prep system is starting to align. I'm happy to articulate that progression just to help get us started with Thursday, but I wanted to make sure that feels right. Like, it feels like an okay thing to try to put out there as like a sort of step, a couple of initial steps that might be helpful with implementation. What do folks think about that? Sorry, I don't even know if what I said makes sense. I haven't had enough dried mango, so that might be undermining communication.
It sounds like a plan, Donnie.
Very good. Okay. How did I would like to end with a little bit of reflection. What worked about this process? What would have made it better for us as a team? So that we can bring that to Thursday.
I'll just add something because I'm excited to go out into the schools and have these conversations. I think these are very valuable. That's all I wanted to add. So thank you for the opportunity.
Sure.
And I appreciate you doing the practice run. We've been through empathy interviews before, but there's nothing like just watching someone go through it to ease in. Thank you.
I like the shared document too, like gave everybody a voice.
Anything that would help you as a member of the team?
I don't know if you can do the Star Trek mind meld thing where you insert a lot of this into my head, but that would help a ton.
I've been working on my mind meld technique for many years now, and that you never know what's going to come through the pipeline. We know, like, when we meld, lots of crazy stuff. Awesome. Yes, and can we give Meredith a round of applause for pretending to be like 3 versions of herself? Amazing, thank you. All right, well, I really look forward to seeing all of you on Thursday. I know some of you may not be able to make it then. Please still feel free to engage in the interviews and to share those, because those insights will be super useful. And we'll go from there. This is really exciting. There's a lot of really high energy stuff here. And thanks for engaging so deeply today.
Okay, so before we get a motion to adjourn, you're going to send us the Google Doc so we have that in an email so we can respond to you. Okay, great. Okay, so we'll need a motion to adjourn. That concludes where we are for today.
Travis Hamby, I move that we adjourn.
Need a second?
Nicola Mason, second.
Okay, any discussion? Not hearing any. Let's move to the vote. Roll call vote by Meredith.
Randy Poe,
Randy Poe, I vote yes.
Holly Bloodworth,
Holly Bloodworth, yes.
Amanda Ellis,
Amanda Ellis, yes.
Nicola Mason,
Nicola Mason, yes.
Audrey Gilbert,
Audrey Gilbert, yes.
Mike Hesketh,
Mike Hesketh, yes.
Penny Christian. Logged off. Travis Hamby.
Travis Hamby, I vote yes.
Chair, all members have voted.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all. And Donnie, thank you for leading us through an interactive team process here. It's always not easy to do this online. So thank you very much for getting us all involved. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody Thursday after they get their committee member assignment done. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. Bye all.